The receptionist glanced up quickly from her computer screen, frowned, and without shifting her gaze mechanically pointed toward the service entrance beside the main lobby. "Deliveries are that way," she said with a rushed, inattentive tone. The man in the impeccable suit and confident posture paused for a moment, his leather portfolio clutched in his hand. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, but he only smiled briefly, without correcting her assumption. 4 minutes later, the lobby would witness one of those moments that forever changes the atmosphere of a place, when the human resources director appeared and, with discretion and firmness, escorted the receptionist outside under the surprised gaze of colleagues around them. Marcus Richardson felt the weight of all eyes in the lobby as he stood there, maintaining a practiced composure that had become second nature over the years. His heart pounded against his chest, but his expression revealed nothing. Not anger, not hurt, not even the slightest hint of vindication as the HR director, Elaine Winters, quietly asked the receptionist to come with her. He had experienced variations of this moment countless times before. Sometimes, it was security guards following him too closely in high-end stores. Other times, it was being asked if he was lost when he entered executive floors. But something about this particular incident, perhaps it was the sheer audacity of it happening at Horizon Technologies, a company that prided itself on innovation and inclusivity, made it cut deeper than usual. The marble floor of the lobby gleamed under the morning light, streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Atlanta's skyline created a backdrop of ambition and progress through the glass. Marcus adjusted his tie, a deep blue against his crisp white shirt, and nodded politely to the wide-eyed administrative assistant who rushed to the reception desk to cover for her departed colleague. "Mr. Richardson, I'm so sorry," she stammered, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the visitor badge. "Ms. Carter is expecting you in the conference room on the 18th floor." "Thank you," he replied, his voice carrying the same calm authority it always did. The same voice that had closed million-dollar deals, inspired a team of 75 at Accessitech, and somehow managed to sound unshaken even on days like this. As the elevator climbed, Marcus closed his eyes briefly, letting the mechanical hum wash over him. 15 years building a company focused on making digital technology accessible to everyone, regardless of ability or background. 5 successful rounds of funding, 3 innovation awards. And still, to some, he was just another black man who couldn't possibly belong in the corridors of power unless he was serving those who did. The elevator doors opened to reveal Amara Carter, Horizon's Chief Innovation Officer, waiting with an expression that shifted from professional welcome to concerned empathy, as she read something in his face that most people missed. "Marcus," she said, extending her hand, then changing her mind and moving in for a brief hug. "I just got a text from Elaine. I'm mortified." "It happens," he said simply, returning the embrace with a single pat on her shoulder before stepping back. "Shall we focus on why I'm here? Your team has some impressive ideas about accessibility integration." Amara nodded, understanding his need to redirect, to be seen for his work rather than as the subject of an uncomfortable incident. As they walked toward the conference room, the glass walls offered reflections of themselves, 2 black executives moving through a space where they were exceptions rather than the rule. Marcus caught sight of his reflection, a tall man of 52 with close-cropped salt and pepper hair, skin the color of aged mahogany, and eyes that carried both warmth and wariness in equal measure. "I've gathered our design and development leads," Amara was saying as they approached the room where 8 people sat waiting. "They're excited about the potential collaboration between Horizon and Accessitech." The next 90 minutes were a welcome immersion in what Marcus did best, explaining the ways technology could be designed from the ground up to include everyone, breaking down barriers rather than creating new ones that required retrofitting later. His hands moved expressively as he spoke about sensory alternatives, cognitive accessibility, and the economic benefits of universal design. The team was engaged, asking thoughtful questions, taking notes. This was where he belonged, doing work that mattered. But beneath the professional exchange, a quiet calculation was taking place in his mind. Horizon Technologies was poised to become Accessitech's biggest client yet. This partnership could expand their impact exponentially. Yet he couldn't ignore what had happened downstairs, what it represented about the culture here. The question that had followed him throughout his career echoed again. "When do you speak up?" And when do you let it go to preserve the greater goal? Have you ever had to make that choice? To weigh the importance of addressing a wrong against the potential good you might accomplish by focusing elsewhere? Share your experience in the comments below. We all face these crossroads moments that test our priorities and values. As the meeting concluded and hands were shaken, Amara pulled Marcus aside. "The team is heading to lunch. Will you join us?" He checked his watch, a vintage Omega that had been his father's, the only item of luxury the hard-working postal worker had ever owned. "I need to make a few calls first. Perhaps I can catch up." What he didn't say was that he needed a moment alone, needed to process, to decide what, if anything, he would do about what had happened in the lobby. Amara seemed to understand anyway, squeezing his arm gently before leading her team out. Alone in the glass-walled conference room, Marcus loosened his tie slightly and took out his phone. 3 missed calls from Elaine Winters in HR, a text from his COO back at Accessitech headquarters, and a news alert about a racial discrimination lawsuit filed against another tech company across town. The digital world bringing reminders that some things hadn't changed nearly as much as the gleaming architecture and sleek technology would suggest. His thumb hovered over Elaine's contact information. A part of him, the part that had been raised by a father who emphasized keeping your head down and working twice as hard, wanted to let it go. Another part, influenced by his mother who had marched for civil rights in her youth, urged him to address it directly. The tension between these approaches had been the undercurrent of his entire professional life. The panoramic view of Atlanta stretched before him, a city with deep historical wounds and determined progress existing side by side. In the reflection of the window, he saw not just himself but the ghostly overlay of those who had come before him, who had faced far worse than misidentification in a corporate lobby. What would honoring their struggles look like in this moment? His phone buzzed again. Elaine, persistent. With a deep breath, he answered. "Mr. Richardson," she began, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone navigating a potential minefield. "I want to personally apologize for what happened this morning." "Thank you, Elaine," he replied evenly. "I appreciate that. The receptionist, Melissa, has been placed on administrative leave pending review. I want to assure you that this kind of behavior is completely unacceptable at Horizon." There it was, the quick move to punishment, to making the problem disappear. Marcus had seen it before. Someone would be scapegoated, policies would be cited, and the deeper issues would remain unaddressed. "Elaine," he said, turning away from the window to face the empty conference room, "what I'd like to discuss is not what happens to Melissa, but what happens next at Horizon." The silence on the other end suggested surprise. "I'm not sure I follow. I believe this presents an opportunity for Horizon to look more deeply at its culture. I'm not interested in seeing someone lose their job over an assumption. I'm interested in addressing why that assumption was made in the first place, and what other assumptions might be affecting how people experience your workplace." Another beat of silence. "That's not the response I was expecting, Mr. Richardson. Call me Marcus, please." He sat down, feeling the weight of the conversation. "And I'd like to propose a different approach if you're open to it. If you're finding value in this story about confronting everyday biases with dignity and wisdom, please hit the like button and subscribe. Your support helps bring more stories that explore these important realities to light." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Marcus's office back at Accessitech's headquarters. The space reflected his approach to leadership, open without the imposing desk that created distance between him and those who came to speak with him, but thoughtfully designed with elements that spoke to his journey. African art collected during travels hung alongside framed patents and innovation awards. A worn copy of his father's postal service badge sat in a simple frame next to a modern sculpture given to him by his design team. Diana Hughes, his COO and friend of 20 years, leaned against the doorframe, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, her expression a mixture of concern and that familiar spark of strategic thinking. "So you're telling me," she said, crossing her arms, "that instead of accepting their apology and moving on or demanding accountability, you suggested a collaborative approach to examining their entire corporate culture?" Marcus smiled slightly. "That's correct." "And they agreed to this?" "Amara did. She has influence with their CEO." He shifted in his chair. Elaine in HR seemed relieved, actually. "I think she knows there are deeper issues there." Diana moved into the room, settling into the chair across from him. At 63, She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had survived corporate America's hostility toward both her gender and her age. The lines around her eyes spoke of decades of squinting at fine print and fighting for a seat at tables where she wasn't expected. "You know this could delay the contract," she said, not as a criticism, but as an acknowledgement of reality. "Jensen in finance is already nervous about our Q3 projections." Marcus nodded. "I know, but I keep thinking about why we started Accessitech in the first place. It wasn't just to make technology more accessible. It was to change how the technology world thinks about inclusion entirely. What good is it if we partner with companies that don't really embrace those values internally?" Diana's eyes softened. "You're right, of course, it's just a risk." After a pause, she added, "Jensen won't like it, but he respects you. The team will follow your lead on this." "Thank you." Marcus looked out his window at the Accessitech campus, more modest than Horizon's downtown skyscraper, but bustling with a diversity that had been intentionally cultivated. "I need to call Amara back and talk about next steps." As Diana stood to leave, she paused. "This reminds me of what happened with Westbrook Financial last year. Different scenario, same underlying issue." The memory made Marcus's jaw tighten. The Westbrook situation had been more blatant, a senior executive making an explicitly racist comment during a meeting, followed by fumbling attempts at damage control rather than genuine accountability. Accessitech had walked away from that partnership despite the financial implications. "This feels different," he said after a moment. "There's an opening here, a willingness to engage that wasn't present with Westbrook." Diana nodded. "Just be careful. These moments take a toll whether you acknowledge it or not." After she left, Marcus sat in silence, feeling the familiar weight settle onto his shoulders. Diana was right. Each of these incidents extracted a cost. The mental calculations, the careful navigation, the constant awareness of how his responses would be perceived. Sometimes he wondered what it would be like to simply react as a person, not as a black CEO who had to consider the ripple effects of every word and gesture. His phone chimed with a text from his daughter, Zora, a second-year medical student. "Dad, are we still on for dinner tonight? Need to talk to you about something." The message pulled him back from the edge of heaviness. Zora, named for the writer Zora Neale Hurston, had been his anchor since her birth 24 years ago. Even after losing her mother to cancer when she was 12, Zora had maintained a fierce optimism and determination that continually renewed his own. "Absolutely," he texted back. 7 p.m. at Giovanni's. He added a heart emoji, one of the few instances where his typically formal digital communication softened. The next morning arrived with the weight of decision. Marcus had barely slept, his mind cycling through approaches and potential outcomes. Over pasta the night before, Zora had shared her experiences with a professor who consistently ignored or dismissed her contributions in class while amplifying those of white male students. The parallels to his own situation hadn't been lost on either of them. "What are you going to do about it, Dad?" she had asked, her eyes, so like her mother's, challenging him in the way that had always pushed him beyond comfort. Now, as he drove toward Horizon's headquarters for the hastily arranged meeting with their leadership team, her question echoed in his mind. What was he going to do? The easy path was clear. Accept their apology, perhaps request some basic diversity training for staff, and proceed with the partnership as planned. Accessitech needed this contract. His employees counted on his business acumen as much as his moral leadership. The parking garage was nearly empty at this early hour. His footsteps echoed as he made his way to the elevator, his reflection fragmented in the polished surfaces around him. He noted the tension in his own shoulders, the slight furrow in his brow. These were the physical manifestations of the battle between pragmatism and principle that had waged within him throughout the night. The elevator opened directly into a small executive reception area on the top floor, where Amara waited. Her usual vibrant confidence seemed tempered this morning. "Thank you for coming," she said, leading him toward a boardroom where 4 people already sat waiting. "I've briefed them on your proposal, but I think hearing it directly from you will have more impact." Marcus recognized Andrew Patterson, Horizon's CEO, a man in his late 50s with the polished look of someone who had inherited both wealth and position. Beside him sat Elaine Winters from HR, her expression carefully neutral. The other 2 were unfamiliar, a younger white man with an air of impatience and an older Asian woman whose attentive posture suggested genuine interest. "Marcus?" Andrew stood, extending his hand. I want to personally apologize for yesterday's unfortunate incident. I assure you it doesn't reflect our values at Horizon. The words were perfect, practiced, polished, and completely expected. Marcus shook his hand firmly, noting the perfect balance of pressure that powerful men were taught to use in these exchanges. "Thank you for meeting with me," Marcus replied, taking the offered seat. "I appreciate the opportunity to discuss not just yesterday's incident, but the path forward." Andrew nodded toward Elaine. "We've already taken steps to address the specific situation. The employee in question has been—" "If I may," Marcus interrupted gently, "I'd like to suggest we focus less on the individual employee and more on the environment that made her assumptions seem reasonable to her." The younger man, who Amara quietly introduced as Ryan Nichols, operations director, shifted in his seat. "With all due respect, Mr. Richardson, I'm not sure it's fair to blame our company culture for one person's mistake. We have extensive diversity policies in place." Marcus met his gaze steadily. "Policies are important, Mr. Nichols, but culture is what happens despite those policies. Culture is revealed in moments when people act on instinct rather than training." The older woman nodded slightly. Amara introduced her as Dr. Helen Chen, Head of Research and Development. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Richardson?" Andrew asked, his tone suggesting he was hoping for a quick, ideally inexpensive resolution. "I'm proposing a collaborative review of your organizational culture with a focus on inclusion and belonging," Marcus replied. "Not conducted by outside consultants who deliver a report that gets filed away, but by your own people, with some guidance from my team at Accessitech. We have experience in this area that could benefit Horizon." Ryan's expression hardened. "That sounds like a considerable undertaking for what was essentially a misunderstanding." Was it, though? The question came from Dr. Chen, surprising everyone at the table. All eyes turned to her as she continued. "I've been with Horizon for 15 years. In that time, I've been mistaken for administrative staff, asked to take notes in meetings where I was the senior person present, and had my ideas attributed to male colleagues. If Mr. Richardson is offering us an opportunity to address these patterns, I think we should consider it carefully." The silence that followed her statement hung heavy in the air. Marcus watched the subtle shifts in body language around the table. Andrew's slight discomfort, Elaine's almost imperceptible nod, Ryan's defensive posture, and Amara's quiet determination. "I understand this isn't a simple proposition," Marcus said into the silence. "It requires vulnerability and a willingness to hear difficult truths, but I believe Horizon wants to be more than just another tech company with good intentions and blind spots. The question is whether you're willing to do the uncomfortable work that takes you from where you are to where you aspire to be. Have you ever spoken up about workplace culture, even when it was risky? What happened as a result? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might help others find their voice." The meeting concluded with tentative agreement to Marcus's proposal. Andrew, clearly uncomfortable but aware of the potential business implications of dismissing the suggestion, had asked for a more detailed plan to review. Ryan had remained skeptical but was overruled. Dr. Chen had offered to help coordinate from Horizon's side, a development that gave Marcus cautious hope. As he drove back to Accessitech, Marcus's phone rang through the car's speaker system. Diana's name appeared on the dashboard display. "How did it go?" she asked without preamble when he answered. "About as expected," he replied, navigating through Atlanta's morning traffic. "Initial resistance, particularly from their operations director, but also some surprising support. They've asked for a detailed proposal." "I've already started drafting one," Diana said, and Marcus could hear the smile in her voice. She had known him long enough to anticipate his moves. "Jensen is having palpitations about the timeline, but I reminded him that our Q4 projections look strong regardless. Thank you." The simple words carried the weight of 2 decades of friendship and professional trust. "There's something else," Diana continued, her tone shifting. "Melissa Barrett, the receptionist from yesterday, she's posted about the incident on her personal social media. It's starting to get some traction." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest. "What's she saying?" "That she was fired for an innocent mistake and that you're using your position to make an example of her. The usual deflection and distortion. Nothing original." He sighed, stopping at a red light and watching pedestrians cross in front of his car. People rushing to work, to meetings, to lives that didn't involve navigating these particular complexities. "I specifically asked that she not be fired," he said quietly. "I know. But that's not the narrative she's creating. Diana paused. Do you want our communications team to prepare a response? The light turned green. Marcus pressed the accelerator gently, considering the options. A public statement could escalate the situation, turning a private incident into a public spectacle. Silence could allow misinformation to spread unchallenged. Not yet, he decided. Let's see how this develops. For now, focus on the proposal for Horizon. If we need to address the social media situation later, we will. After disconnecting the call, Marcus drove in silence, the morning sun highlighting the city's contrasts, gleaming new developments alongside historically black neighborhoods fighting gentrification. Atlanta, like most American cities, was a patchwork of progress and persistent inequality. His thoughts drifted to a conversation with his father years ago, not long after Marcus had founded Accessitech. They had been sitting on the porch of the modest home where he'd grown up, the evening air heavy with summer heat and the scent of his mother's gardenia bushes. "Son," his father had said, the deepening lines around his eyes crinkling as he spoke, "I'm proud of what you're building. But remember something important. When you climb up, you've got to do more than just stand on top. You've got to change the ladder itself." At the time, Marcus had nodded in respect but hadn't fully grasped the wisdom. Now at 52, with silver threading through his hair and the weight of both success and responsibility on his shoulders, he understood. The ladder to opportunity and recognition was fundamentally flawed, with missing rungs for some, electrical shocks for others, and gatekeepers at various levels who decided who could proceed and who would be sent back down. His father, Theodore Richardson, had worked 35 years for the Postal Service, walking the same route through changing neighborhoods, carrying other people's opportunities in his mailbag, while creating his own through dignity and persistence. His mother, Gloria, had been a high school English teacher who quoted Langston Hughes and Maya Angelou as often as Shakespeare, ensuring her students saw themselves in literature's grand conversation. Both had instilled in him the understanding that excellence was not just a personal goal but a communal responsibility, that his achievements would either reinforce or help dismantle the stereotypes that confined others. It was an exhausting expectation to place on a child, but also a powerful one that had shaped his approach to leadership. If you've been moved by this story of navigating workplace bias with dignity and purpose, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means we can continue exploring these important realities that shape our professional lives. As Marcus pulled into his reserved parking space at Accessitech headquarters, his phone buzzed with a text from Amara. "Social media situation escalating. New posts claiming you demanded her firing. Need to talk ASAP." The weight on his shoulders increased incrementally. He'd hoped for time to develop the cultural assessment plan without distractions. Now it seemed the narrative was being hijacked, twisted into something that would make constructive conversation more difficult. The Accessitech lobby was a stark contrast to Horizon's marble grandeur. Here, warm wood tones and comfortable seating created an environment that felt accessible in every sense of the word. Josephine Banks, the head receptionist who had been with the company since its earliest days, greeted him with her customary warmth. "Good morning, Mr. Richardson," she said, her Louisiana accent still strong despite decades in Atlanta. At 70, with her crown of silver locks and reading glasses perched on her nose, she was the unofficial matriarch of the office. "Ms. Hughes is waiting for you in the conference room with the communications team." "Thank you, Josephine," he replied, then paused. "Everything quiet here this morning?" She gave him a knowing look. "If you're asking whether people are talking about what happened at Horizon, the answer is yes. News travels fast." She lowered her voice. "You did the right thing standing your ground. My grandson would be proud to see it." Her grandson, Michael, was a recent college graduate who had interned at Accessitech the previous summer. Bright, ambitious, and already facing his own versions of the assumptions Marcus had dealt with for decades. He nodded, acknowledging her support without having to verbalize it. This was part of leadership too, carrying not just your own hopes, but those of everyone who saw in you the possibility of change. The conference room held a tense energy when he entered. Diana sat at the head of the small table, flanked by Terrence Washington, Communications Director, and Alicia Ramirez, Legal Counsel. Their expressions suggested the situation had evolved since Diana's call. "It's gone beyond social media," Terrence said without preamble, sliding a tablet across the table. "Local news has picked it up. Tech CEO under fire for receptionist's termination after racial incident. Marcus scanned the article, noting the careful framing that avoided direct accusations while implying plenty. Melissa Barrett was quoted extensively, positioning herself as a victim of corporate overreaction. Horizon was described as declining to comment on personnel matters. His own company was described as powerful and influential, subtle coding that painted him as the Goliath to Melissa's David. "We need to get ahead of this," Alicia said, her legal mind already calculating potential reputational damage. A simple statement clarifying that you never requested her termination should suffice. "It won't," Marcus replied, setting down the tablet. "Once we engage directly, we're in a back and forth that distracts from the real issue." "Which is?" Terence asked, his PR instincts seeking the core message. That this was never about punishment. It was about learning and change. Marcus stood and moved to the window, looking out at the campus where diverse teams of engineers and designers were building technology meant to connect rather than divide. "If we focus on Melissa Barrett's employment status, we've already lost the larger point." Diana leaned forward. "So what's your approach?" Marcus turned back to face them. "We reach out to Amara and Elaine at Horizon. Suggest they offer to reinstate Ms. Barrett as part of a larger cultural initiative. We position this not as backtracking, but as evidence of the very approach I've been advocating, one that focuses on growth rather than punishment." "And if she declines to return?" Alicia asked pragmatically. "Then that's her choice, but we will have demonstrated a commitment to the principles we're espousing." Terence looked skeptical. "It's a risk. The narrative could become that you back down under pressure." "Or," Diana interjected, "it could become that Marcus Richardson practices what he preaches, that when he talks about creating inclusive cultures that allow for learning and growth, he means it for everyone, not just those who look like him." The tension in the room shifted slightly as they considered this angle. It wasn't a perfect solution. There were no perfect solutions to situations built on centuries of imperfect systems. But it offered a path forward that aligned with Accessitech's fundamental values. "Draft the communication to Horizon," Marcus decided, "and prepare a simple statement for when the media reaches out directly, something that emphasizes our commitment to collaborative approaches to cultural change." As the meeting dispersed, Marcus found himself alone with Diana. The weight of leadership felt particularly heavy in this moment. The constant balancing of business imperatives against moral ones, the awareness that his decisions affected not just his own company, but potentially the broader conversation about inclusion in the tech world. "You're doing the right thing," Diana said quietly, "even if it's complicated." "Is it?" he asked, genuine uncertainty in his voice. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm being too accommodating, too willing to educate rather than demand accountability." Diana considered this, the afternoon light catching the silver in her hair. "My grandmother used to say that justice without mercy becomes just another form of oppression. You're trying to find that balance, accountability that allows for growth." Marcus nodded, grateful for her understanding. "Call Amara, set up the conversation, and let's get the proposal for the cultural assessment finished today. I want to move forward while there's still an opening." As Diana left to make the arrangements, Marcus sat alone in the conference room, feeling the familiar tension between hope and weariness. He thought of Zora, of what kind of world he was helping to shape for her, and whether his approach would make her path easier, or if she would someday look back and wish he had been more revolutionary, less willing to work within flawed systems. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You don't know me, but I work at Horizon. What happened to you happens all the time here. Thank you for not letting it slide." The message both heartened and troubled him. It suggested there was indeed a culture problem at Horizon, one that affected multiple employees, but it also highlighted the burden of representation, the expectations placed on him to address issues that should be everyone's responsibility to solve. With a deep breath, he texted back, "Thank you for reaching out. Change is possible if enough people want it." Have you ever been in a situation where your response to injustice was scrutinized or misrepresented? How did you stay focused on your principles while managing public perception? Share your experience below. Your insights could help others facing similar challenges. The afternoon brought developments that shifted the landscape once again. Amara called while Marcus was reviewing the cultural assessment proposal Diana had prepared. "You need to see something," she said, her voice a mixture of concern and something like hope. "Check your email." Marcus opened the message she had just sent, finding a link to an internal Horizon message board. The thread, started anonymously, had quickly grown to dozens of responses from employees sharing experiences similar to what had happened to Marcus, being mistaken for support staff, having credentials questioned, being excluded from informal networks where decisions were really made. This started after Dr. Chen spoke up in yesterday's meeting, Amara explained. She mentioned it to a few colleagues and somehow it spread. People are finally talking about what's been happening all along. The conversation had evolved beyond the incident with Melissa Barrett to address broader patterns, the unwritten expectations about who belonged in which roles, which voices carried authority, and how the company's stated values of innovation and inclusion often failed to translate into daily experience. This changes things, Marcus said, scrolling through the testimonials. Are Patterson and the leadership team aware? They are now, Amara replied. Elaine brought it to Andrew's attention an hour ago. He's processing. The diplomatic phrase suggested discomfort rather than denial, a potentially promising sign. And your suggestion about reinstating Melissa as part of a larger initiative? That's part of what I'm calling about. She's given an interview to Channel 4 News, doubling down on her version of events. She's claiming she was made a scapegoat for political correctness and that you're using your influence to destroy her career. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, feeling a familiar weariness. These situations always seem to follow the same script, the deflection of responsibility, the reframing of accountability as persecution, the subtle inversion that transformed addressing bias into a supposed attack on those who perpetuated it. The interview airs tonight, Amara continued. Our PR team is preparing a statement emphasizing that the decision to place her on leave was made before you proposed any cultural assessment. But honestly, Marcus, I'm worried this will overshadow the important conversation that's starting to happen internally. He understood her concern. Media narratives had a way of simplifying complex situations into digestible conflicts, hero versus villain, winner versus loser, leaving little room for the nuanced work of cultural change. What's your read on Patterson now, he asked, focusing on what mattered most, whether Horizon's leadership was still open to meaningful engagement. Conflicted, Amara replied honestly. The message board posts have shaken him. I don't think he realized how widespread these experiences were, but he's also concerned about the public relations aspect, especially with Melissa going to the media. And Ryan Nichols? Amara's sigh told him everything. Still resistant. He's arguing that the message board is creating division rather than solving problems. Some division is necessary for healing, Marcus said, echoing words his mother had often used, like a surgeon cutting away infection before the body can properly recover. I'll quote you on that, Amara said with a hint of her usual humor returning. Look, I need to go into a budget meeting, but I wanted you to know what's happening. The proposal for the cultural assessment, is it ready? I think having something concrete to discuss might help focus everyone. Diana's finalizing it now. You'll have it within the hour. After the call ended, Marcus sat in silence for a few moments, absorbing the developments. The situation was evolving beyond what he had initially anticipated, becoming something larger, more public, and potentially more impactful. There was opportunity in that evolution, but also risk, the risk that the conversation would become so polarized that meaningful change would be impossible. His office door opened, and Josephine appeared with a cup of tea, a special blend she insisted helped with difficult decisions. Thought you might need this, she said, placing it beside him. Diana mentioned things are getting complicated. Thank you, Josephine. He accepted the tea gratefully. Yes, it seems what started as a simple misunderstanding is becoming quite the situation. She settled into the chair across from his desk without invitation, a privilege earned through years of loyal service and wise counsel. You know, this reminds me of something that happened back in 1978 when I was working at Atlanta First National. Marcus smiled slightly. Josephine's stories always contained wisdom disguised as reminiscence. I was the only black woman in the accounting department, she continued, adjusting her glasses. One day a new manager came in and assumed I was the cleaning staff, asked me if I'd emptied his wastebasket yet. She paused, sipping from her own cup of tea. When I explained I was an accountant, he was embarrassed, apologized profusely, but the next day he called me into his office and offered me a promotion to senior accountant. That seems unusual, Marcus observed. It was, she agreed with a knowing nod. Later I found out he was terrified I'd file a discrimination complaint. That promotion wasn't about recognizing my abilities. It was insurance against his own mistake. The parallel to his current situation wasn't lost on Marcus. So what did you do? I took the promotion, she said simply, but I also made it clear that I expected real changes in how the department operated, not just for me, but for everyone who might come after me. I used that moment of his discomfort to push for what should have been happening all along. Marcus understood what she was really saying. You think I should use Horizon's current vulnerability to push for deeper changes? I think, Josephine said carefully, rising to her feet, that sometimes people do the right thing for the wrong reasons, and sometimes that's enough to start with, as long as you make sure the right thing sticks. With that, she patted his shoulder gently and left, closing the door behind her. If this story about navigating workplace prejudice with wisdom and strategic thinking resonates with you, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe. Your support helps bring these important conversations to more people who need them. The evening news broadcast felt like watching a parallel reality unfold, one where the nuanced conversation about corporate culture had been flattened into a simple narrative of conflict. The segment opened with a sympathetic close-up of Melissa Barrett, her eyes slightly reddened as if she'd been crying, though Marcus noticed they remained completely dry throughout the interview. I was just doing my job, she explained to the attentive reporter. We get a lot of deliveries and I was trying to direct him efficiently. I had no idea who he was. The reporter nodded with performative understanding. And then what happened? Before I knew it, I was being escorted to HR and told I was being placed on leave. All because this CEO felt disrespected. She dabbed at her dry eyes. I'm a single mum. I need this job. The manipulation was so transparent that Marcus might have laughed if the stakes weren't so high. The segment continued with a brief statement from Horizon, acknowledging an unfortunate misunderstanding and emphasizing their commitment to a respectful workplace. No mention was made of the cultural assessment or the internal conversations happening at the company. Marcus appeared in archival footage from a tech conference the previous year, looking authoritative as he discussed digital accessibility. The voiceover described him as powerful and influential again, subtle framing that positioned him as the aggressor, despite being the one who had experienced the bias. Mr. Richardson declined to comment for this story, the reporter concluded, as if his silence were somehow suspicious rather than a standard legal approach to public relations. Zora called minutes after the segment aired, her voice tight with controlled anger. Dad, this is outrageous. They're completely misrepresenting what happened. I know, sweetheart, he replied, keeping his own voice calm despite the frustration churning beneath the surface. But responding directly would only feed the cycle. So you just let them paint you as the villain? When you specifically asked that she not be fired? Her indignation on his behalf was both touching and concerning. He didn't want this situation to harden her, to make her more cynical about the possibility of change. The truth has a way of emerging, Zora. And in the meantime, something important is happening at Horizon. People are finally talking about experiences they've kept silent about for years. That's worth more than correcting one misrepresentation in the media. Her sigh suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Mom would have gone on camera and set the record straight. The mention of Vivian, gone now for 12 years, created a familiar ache in his chest. She had been the more outspoken of the two of them, quick to challenge injustice directly and publicly. Her approach had complemented his more strategic, behind-the-scenes work. Without her, he sometimes wondered if he'd become too cautious, too willing to work within systems rather than dismantle them. Your mother had a gift for speaking truth to power, he acknowledged, but she also understood that different moments call for different approaches. After reassuring Zora and promising to keep her updated, Marcus poured himself a small glass of bourbon and stepped out onto the balcony of his downtown apartment. The Atlanta skyline glittered against the night sky, beautiful and imperfect like the city itself. His phone buzzed with a text from Diana. Feedback from Horizon leadership on the proposal, mixed but mostly positive. Patterson wants to meet tomorrow. Apparently the message board has over 200 posts now. Progress despite the media distraction. Maybe because of it. Sometimes pressure created openings that wouldn't otherwise exist. He texted back his availability for the meeting, then set his phone aside, letting the night air and the distant sounds of the city wash over him. The memories came unbidden, as they often did in quiet moments. his father's hands, strong and gentle, showing him how to tie a perfect Windsor knot for his first high school debate competition. His mother's voice reading Langston Hughes aloud in their living room. "Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly." Vivian, brilliant and fierce, challenging him to think bigger when they were still dating in college. "It's not enough to get a seat at the table, Marcus. You have to change the menu." And Zora at 16, coming home from school quiet and withdrawn after a teacher had suggested, with false concern, that perhaps AP Physics was too challenging for her, the only black girl in the class, despite her perfect grades in all previous science courses. These moments formed the constellation of his purpose, the reason he had built Accessitech, not just as a company, but as a vehicle for change. Technology should open doors, not reinforce barriers. Workplaces should recognize talent in all its forms, not just the ones that matched predetermined expectations. The bourbon warmed his throat as he contemplated what tomorrow might bring. Another meeting, another chance to push for meaningful change rather than symbolic gestures. Another opportunity to demonstrate what leadership could look like when it prioritized transformation over tradition. His phone buzzed again. Amara this time. "Just left emergency leadership meeting." Patterson seems genuinely shaken by employee messages. Even Ryan is quieter than usual. Tomorrow's meeting could be pivotal. Perhaps there was reason for cautious hope. Not that one incident and its aftermath would magically transform a corporate culture built on decades of unexamined assumptions, but that it might create an opening, a crack in the foundation through which new growth could emerge. Marcus finished his drink and returned inside, preparing for what would likely be another restless night. The weight of representation never fully lifted, the awareness that his actions would be scrutinized not just as those of Marcus Richardson, individual, but as those of a black executive whose responses would be used to judge others who looked like him. It was exhausting, this additional layer of calculation that his white counterparts rarely had to consider. But it was also reality, at least for now. And within that reality, he would continue to find ways to create the changes that might, eventually, gradually, make such calculations unnecessary for those who would follow. Morning arrived with unexpected developments. As Marcus prepared for the day, his phone lit up with notifications, emails, texts, news alerts. Something had shifted overnight in the public narrative. A blog post from a Horizon employee had gone viral, describing not just the incident with Melissa Barrett, but the subsequent internal conversation it had sparked. The anonymous author detailed their own experiences with subtle discrimination at the company and praised Marcus's approach of pushing for cultural assessment rather than individual punishment. "What's remarkable," the post read, "is that Richardson had every right to be angry, to demand consequences. Instead, he's asking for something far more meaningful, a commitment to examining and changing the underlying issues. This isn't about one receptionist's mistake. It's about systems that make such mistakes predictable and even logical within certain frameworks." The post had been shared thousands of times overnight, with many commenters adding their own workplace experiences. Major tech publications were picking up the story, framing it now as a case study in leadership rather than a simple conflict. By the time Marcus arrived at Horizon for the scheduled meeting, the atmosphere had noticeably shifted. Security greeted him by name with respectful nods. The new receptionist, a young black woman who introduced herself as Tanya, was professionally warm as she escorted him to the executive floor. The conference room held an expanded group, Andrew Patterson and Elaine Winters as expected, but also Dr. Chen, Ryan Nichols, and 3 other executives Marcus hadn't met before. Amara sat near the head of the table, her expression cautiously optimistic. "Mr. Richardson," Andrew began, then corrected himself. "Marcus, thank you for joining us this morning. I want to start by saying that I've reviewed your proposal for the cultural assessment thoroughly, and I find it both comprehensive and thoughtful." Marcus nodded, noting the slight tension in Patterson's jaw. This was not a comfortable conversation for him, but he was engaging nonetheless. "Before we discuss specifics," Andrew continued, "I want to address the situation with Melissa Barrett. Her placement on administrative leave was our decision, made before any conversation with you. Her characterization of events in the media has been misleading." "I appreciate that clarification," Marcus replied evenly. Ryan Nichols cleared his throat. "I have to admit, I was skeptical about this whole approach. It seemed like an overreaction to a simple misunderstanding. He shifted in his seat. But the message board posts have been educational. I had no idea so many of our employees were having these experiences. The admission seemed to cost him something in pride, but the fact that he made it at all suggested genuine reflection. That's often the case, Marcus said, careful to keep judgment from his tone. These experiences can remain invisible to those who don't have them, especially in environments where people don't feel safe sharing them. Dr. Chen nodded, which is exactly why this assessment is so important. We need structured ways to surface these issues before they become cultural blind spots. The meeting proceeded with a detailed discussion of the proposal Diana had prepared. It outlined a three-phase approach: confidential data gathering through anonymous surveys and focus groups, analysis of policies, procedures, and unwritten norms that might contribute to exclusion, and collaborative development of strategies for meaningful change. The key difference from standard diversity initiatives, Marcus explained, is that this isn't about checking boxes or meeting quotas. It's about creating conditions where everyone can contribute fully, where talent isn't overlooked because it doesn't match preconceived notions of what it should look like. As the discussion continued, Marcus observed the subtle shifts in the room. Andrew Patterson was engaged but cautious, clearly weighing business implications alongside moral ones. Ryan remained somewhat resistant, though less overtly than before. Dr. Chen was fully supportive, offering practical suggestions for implementation. Amara moved skillfully between perspectives, building bridges between different concerns. Have you witnessed a workplace beginning to address issues of bias and inclusion? What approaches seemed most effective in creating real change rather than just symbolic gestures? Share your observations in the comments below. The meeting concluded with agreement to move forward with the cultural assessment, starting the following week. As people gathered their materials to leave, Ryan approached Marcus directly. I want to apologize, he said stiffly, clearly uncomfortable but determined. I was dismissive yesterday and I was wrong. This is important work. Thank you, Marcus replied, offering his hand. It takes courage to reconsider established positions. As they shook hands, Marcus recognized that this small moment, this acknowledgement between two men with very different experiences of the professional world, was as significant as any formal agreement. Change happened in these interactions, these individual recognitions, even as structural changes were also necessary. Amara accompanied him to the elevator, her usual energy somewhat restored. This is actually happening, she said quietly. I've been pushing for something like this for years, but it took... She trailed off. It took an incident that couldn't be ignored, Marcus finished for her. Sometimes that's what creates the opening. I'm sorry it had to be you, she said, genuine regret in her voice. Don't be. If this leads to real change, it's worth it. The elevator arrived, and as he stepped in, he added, besides, I've had plenty of practice. That afternoon back at Accessitech, Marcus called a meeting of his executive team to share the developments. As they gathered in the conference room, Diana, Terence, Alicia, and the heads of various departments, he felt a responsibility to frame what was happening accurately. The situation with Horizon is evolving in a positive direction, he began, but I want to emphasize something important. This isn't about one incident or one company. It's about patterns that exist throughout our industry and beyond. Heads nodded around the table. Many of them had faced their own versions of what had happened to him. The media narrative will probably continue to focus on conflict rather than resolution, he continued. Our job is to stay focused on the actual work of change, not the portrayal of it. There's something else we should discuss, Diana said, glancing at her tablet. The Horizon situation has raised our profile considerably. We've received inquiries from 3 other major tech companies about our approach to inclusion and accessibility. They're interested in similar cultural assessments. This was unexpected but not unwelcome news. Part of Accessitech's mission had always been to influence the broader tech ecosystem, not just create products within it. That's encouraging, Marcus acknowledged, but we need to be careful about how we proceed. This can't become a service we sell to companies looking for quick fixes or good PR. The work needs integrity. Agreed, Diana replied. I've drafted some criteria for determining which opportunities to pursue. Commitment from leadership would be essential, along with transparency about findings and a willingness to invest in meaningful changes. The discussion continued, exploring how Accessitech might expand its impact while staying true to its core purpose. As his team engaged thoughtfully with the complexities, Marcus felt a familiar mixture of pride and gratitude. They had built something here that went beyond profit margins and market share, a community committed to transformation. His phone vibrated with a text from Zora. "Just saw the blog post about what's happening at Horizon. Proud of you, Dad. Mom would be too." The simple message brought unexpected emotion to the surface. Marcus excused himself briefly, stepping into the hallway to compose a response. "Thank you, sweetheart. Just trying to do what's right. Dinner tomorrow." The week that followed brought rapid developments. The cultural assessment at Horizon began with an anonymous survey that received an unprecedented 89% participation rate. Employees seemed eager to share experiences that had previously remained unvoiced. Melissa Barrett gave another interview, this time to a conservative podcast, positioning herself as a victim of cancel culture. But the narrative had shifted enough that her claims gained little traction beyond certain echo chambers. Horizon issued a statement clarifying that her administrative leave was a standard procedure during any workplace incident review, not a termination. Marcus focused on ensuring that the assessment process maintained integrity, that it wasn't co-opted into a public relations exercise, but remained centered on creating meaningful change. He worked closely with Dr. Chen, who had emerged as a powerful internal advocate, leveraging her 15 years of institutional knowledge and reputation to keep leadership accountable. On Friday afternoon, as he reviewed preliminary data from the Horizon survey, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Andrew Patterson himself had come to Accessitech headquarters, requesting a private conversation. They sat in Marcus's office, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the room. Patterson looked tired, the polished executive veneer somewhat diminished. "I've been reading through the anonymous responses," he said without preamble. "It's been enlightening and, frankly, disturbing." Marcus waited, sensing there was more coming. "I've prided myself on building a company that values innovation and forward thinking," Patterson continued. "I believe that meant we were naturally inclusive as well, but clearly there's been a disconnect between my perception and the reality many of our employees experience. Recognition is the first step," Marcus offered. "Many leaders never get that far." Patterson looked at him directly. "I want to do more than recognize the problem. I want to address it substantively. And I think that may require changes I hadn't anticipated when we started this process." "What kind of changes?" "In leadership, for one thing." Patterson's gaze shifted to the window, to the view of Atlanta beyond. "Ryan Nichols has submitted his resignation. He says he's not the right person to help lead the cultural changes needed." This was significant news. Ryan had been resistant from the beginning, though he'd shown signs of evolution in recent days. "Was this voluntary?" Marcus asked carefully. "Yes and no," Patterson admitted. "After reviewing the survey data, I had a frank conversation with him about the reports of his dismissive behavior toward women and people of color on his teams. I didn't ask for his resignation, but I made it clear that significant changes in his approach would be necessary. And he chose to leave instead." Patterson nodded. He said, and I quote, "Maybe it's time for someone else to have a chance." I think that might be the most self-aware statement he's ever made. This created both an opportunity and a challenge. Leadership transitions were moments of vulnerability for organizational culture. They could either reinforce existing patterns or create openings for new ones. "Have you considered who might replace him?" Marcus asked. "That's partly why I'm here," Patterson replied. "There's a woman on his team, Vanessa Washington. Black, mid-40s, been with the company 9 years. Brilliant at operations, but consistently overlooked for advancement. The survey comments include multiple mentions of her solving problems that others couldn't, only to have Ryan take credit." Marcus recognized the pattern immediately. "And you're thinking of promoting her?" "I'm considering it, but I wanted your perspective. Not because she's black," he added quickly, "but because this promotion would be happening in the context of everything else. I don't want it to seem like tokenism or a symbolic gesture." The request for guidance was genuine, if somewhat awkward. Marcus considered carefully before responding. "If she's the most qualified person, and it sounds like she is, then the promotion is simply overdue recognition of talent. The timing might raise questions, but that doesn't make it wrong." He paused. "The more important question is, whether you're prepared to truly support her in the role. Putting someone in a leadership position without giving them the authority and backing they need to succeed can do more harm than good. Patterson nodded slowly. That's fair, and something I need to consider carefully. After Patterson left, Marcus sat quietly, reflecting on the conversation. Real change was messy and non-linear. It came in fits and starts, in moments of clarity followed by uncertainty. But something was undeniably shifting at Horizon, something that might eventually create a more equitable environment, not just for Vanessa Washington, but for everyone who worked there. If you're finding value in this exploration of workplace transformation and leadership, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe. These conversations matter, and your support helps them reach more people who need them. The following Monday brought unexpected news. Vanessa Washington had indeed been named Horizon's new operations director. The announcement emphasized her extensive experience and innovative approach to systems management. Social media reactions were mixed, some celebrating the promotion as long overdue, others questioning its timing and motivation. Marcus watched these developments from a careful distance, aware that his continued visible involvement could either validate or undermine Vanessa's authority. This wasn't about him anymore, if it ever truly had been. It was about the ongoing work of creating environments where talent could flourish regardless of who possessed it. At Accessitech, the ripple effects of the Horizon situation continued to expand. 2 more major tech companies had reached out about cultural assessments. A prominent business journal had requested an interview about Marcus's approach to leadership and inclusion. The opportunities to expand their impact were multiplying rapidly. Diana found him in the small garden area behind the building, a quiet space where employees often took breaks or had informal meetings. He was sitting alone on a bench, enjoying the contrast between the structured corporate environment and the deliberate wildness of the native plantings. "There you are," she said, settling beside him, "hiding from your newfound fame." He smiled slightly, taking a moment to think. Things are moving quickly. Too quickly? Maybe. He looked up at the oak tree spreading its branches above them, decades old and still growing. "I'm concerned about our capacity to guide these cultural assessments effectively. We're a tech company, not a diversity consultancy." Diana nodded, understanding the concern. "But we have something most consultants don't: authentic commitment and practical experience. We've built what other companies are now saying they want." She was right. Accessitech had deliberately cultivated a culture where inclusion wasn't just a policy, but a practice. It hadn't happened overnight or without challenges, but the results were evident in everything from their hiring patterns to their product design. "What if we created a separate division?" Diana suggested. "Our team specifically focused on this work, drawing from our experience but dedicated to helping other organizations." The idea had merit. It would allow them to respond to the growing demand without diluting their core business, and it would create a structured way to share what they had learned about building inclusive environments. "Let's explore it," Marcus decided, "but carefully. This work is too important to scale without substance." That evening, as Marcus drove to meet Zora for dinner, his phone rang through the car's speaker system. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Marcus Richardson," he answered, professional by habit. "Mr. Richardson, this is Vanessa Washington." The voice was confident, with the slight huskiness that came from years of making herself heard in rooms that weren't inclined to listen. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Ms. Washington. Congratulations on your promotion." "Thank you." There was a slight pause. "I wanted to speak with you directly rather than through official channels. The circumstances of my promotion are complex, to say the least." Marcus adjusted his approach, recognizing the need for candor. "They are, but complexity doesn't negate merit." "No, it doesn't." Her tone suggested appreciation for his directness. "I've been ready for this role for years. It shouldn't have taken what happened to you to make it possible. But here we are." "Here we are," he agreed. "What can I do for you, Ms. Washington?" "First, please call me Vanessa." She took an audible breath. "Second, I want you to know that I intend to use this position to continue the work you've initiated. Not just the assessment process, but the deeper changes it's meant to bring about. I'm glad to hear that. And third," she continued, "I'd like your advice. Not about operations, I know what I'm doing there, but about navigating the politics of being the first and the only in rooms where some people will always question whether you belong." The request struck a deep chord. Marcus had walked that path for much of his career, calculating when to push and when to strategically retreat, when to call out bias directly and when to address it obliquely. It was a constant negotiation between authenticity and effectiveness, between personal integrity and practical impact. "I'd be happy to share what I've learned," he said, finding a place to pull over so he could give the conversation his full attention, "though I should warn you that I don't have perfect answers. Just experience and perspective." "That's exactly what I'm looking for," Vanessa replied. "Perfect answers don't exist in this space, just better and worse choices depending on the context." For the next 20 minutes, they talked candidly about the realities of leadership, when you're perceived as representing not just yourself, but an entire demographic group, about the extra scrutiny, the higher standards, the way mistakes were magnified, and successes often attributed to factors other than competence. "The hardest part," Marcus shared, "is maintaining your sense of purpose when the obstacles seem designed specifically to wear you down. Finding ways to replenish your spirit without becoming isolated." "I've already felt that," Vanessa admitted. 3 days into the job, and I'm hyper-aware of every decision, every word, every facial expression. It's exhausting." "It is," he agreed, "which is why connections matter, people who understand what you're experiencing without you having to explain it." "Do you have that kind of community?" There was a pause. "Not really. Not professionally, at least. My focus has been on doing the work and hoping it would speak for itself. I'd be happy to introduce you to some people who might become part of that community for you," Marcus offered, "including Diana Hughes, my COO. She navigated these waters when there were even fewer maps than there are now." By the time they ended the call, they had established the beginning of what might become a meaningful professional relationship, not mentor and mentee exactly, but fellow travelers on a challenging path, separated by experience but united in purpose. As Marcus continued his drive to meet Zora, he reflected on how quickly the situation had evolved from a personal slight to something much larger. The incident in the lobby had become a catalyst for conversations and changes that might otherwise have taken years to emerge. The cost had been high, the emotional labor, the public scrutiny, the energy diverted from other priorities, but the potential impact was significant. He thought of his father again, of that conversation on the porch years ago. "Change the ladder itself," Theodore had said. Perhaps this was what he had meant, using moments of individual challenge to create openings for structural transformation, not just climbing higher yourself, but making the climb more accessible for others. When Marcus arrived at the restaurant, Zora was already waiting, her medical textbook stacked neatly beside her as she sipped a glass of water. She rose to embrace him, and he felt the familiar surge of love and pride that her presence always evoked. "So," she said as they settled at the table, "I hear you're becoming something of a corporate culture guru. The medical school grapevine says Horizon isn't the only company wanting your insights now." He smiled at her characterization. "News travels fast, but guru might be overstating it. I'm just sharing what we've tried to practice at Accessitech all along." "Don't minimize it, Dad," she said, her expression serious. "What you're doing matters. It's changing things for people like Vanessa Washington and like me." The connection to his daughter's future wasn't lost on him. Every barrier he helped dismantle might mean one less obstacle in her path. Every conversation he initiated about inclusion might make it easier for her to be seen for her abilities rather than just her identity. "I hope so," he said simply. "That's the goal." Their dinner conversation moved to other topics. Her studies, his latest technology projects, a film they both wanted to see. But beneath the comfortable rhythm of their relationship, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The work wasn't just about creating better workplaces in the abstract. It was about building a world where his brilliant, determined daughter would be valued for exactly who she was. Have you ever found yourself unexpectedly becoming an advocate for change? What challenges and opportunities did that role present? Share your story in the comments. Your experience could provide valuable perspective for others on similar journeys. 2 weeks after the incident in Horizon's lobby, Marcus stood at the podium in a Washington, D.C. conference center, facing an audience of technology leaders gathered for the annual Digital Accessibility Summit. His scheduled keynote had been planned months ago, focused on the business case for inclusive design. But in light of recent events, he had revised his approach. "Innovation doesn't occur in homogeneous environments," he began, looking out at the diverse crowd. It emerges from the friction of different perspectives, from the creative tension that arises when we don't all see the world the same way. The room was silent, attentive. Many had followed the Horizon situation through media coverage, blog posts, and industry discussions. Some had reached out privately to share similar experiences or to ask how they might initiate similar conversations in their own organizations. 2 weeks ago, I was mistaken for delivery staff while visiting a potential business partner, Marcus continued, addressing directly what many already knew. It was a familiar experience, one that many people in this room have had in various forms, but what happened next wasn't familiar at all. He described the process that had unfolded, not focusing on the incident itself, but on the conversation it had sparked, the assessment it had initiated, and the changes that were beginning to emerge. He spoke about Vanessa Washington's promotion not as a solution, but as a single step in an ongoing journey of organizational transformation. The real measure of progress isn't how we respond to public incidents, he explained. It's what happens in everyday interactions when no one is watching. It's who gets heard in meetings, whose ideas get attributed correctly, who gets mentored and sponsored for advancement. It's the accumulation of thousands of small decisions that ultimately create environments where talent can flourish, or where it withers from lack of recognition. As he spoke, Marcus noticed a familiar face in the audience. Paul Lewis, a former college classmate who now wrote for a major technology publication. Their eyes met briefly in recognition before Marcus continued. The question I'm asked most often about the Horizon situation is whether I think real change will result. The honest answer is that I don't know. Cultural transformation isn't an event, it's a process. But I'm encouraged by the willingness to engage, to listen, and to consider perspectives that challenge comfortable assumptions. After the keynote, as attendees networked during the break, Paul approached him, recorder in hand. "Marcus," he said, extending his hand. "Powerful speech. Very different from what I expected based on the program description." "The context changed," Marcus replied simply. "Indeed it did." Paul gestured to a quiet corner. "Would you be willing to talk on the record about what's been happening? There's been so much noise in the media coverage. I'd welcome the chance to present a more nuanced perspective." Marcus considered the request carefully. Until now, he had largely remained silent in the public conversation, letting the work speak for itself. But perhaps there was value in articulating more explicitly the approach he was advocating, not just for Horizon, but for the industry more broadly. "I'm open to that," he decided, "but I'd want to focus on the structural issues and the path forward, not just rehash the incident itself." "Absolutely," Paul agreed. "That's exactly what I'm interested in." Their conversation stretched well beyond the scheduled break, delving into the complexities of creating truly inclusive environments in industries built on particular notions of merit and success. Marcus spoke candidly about the extra burdens carried by underrepresented groups, the need to be exceptional just to be considered adequate, the constant calculations about when and how to address bias, the emotional labor of educating others while also trying to do your actual job. The most insidious aspect of these dynamics, he explained, is how they frame addressing inequality as a distraction from real work, rather than as an essential component of creating environments where the best work can happen. Paul nodded, taking notes. "You've been at this a long time, building Accessitech, advocating for inclusion both in product design and workplace culture. What's different about this moment? Why does it feel like there might be an opening for substantive change?" The question was perceptive, getting at something Marcus had been contemplating himself. "I think we're seeing a convergence of factors," he replied after consideration. "Economic pressures are forcing companies to maximize all available talent. Demographic shifts are changing who makes up the workforce. Social media has created platforms for experiences that used to remain isolated and invisible, and there's a growing recognition that homogeneity is actually a competitive disadvantage in a global, diverse marketplace." Their conversation concluded with Marcus sharing his vision for what truly inclusive organizations could accomplish, the innovations they could create, the problems they could solve, the talents they could nurture. It wasn't a utopian vision, but a practical one, grounded in both ethical considerations and business realities. "I'll send you the draft before it publishes," Paul promised as they parted, "probably late next week." "I appreciate that," Marcus replied. Then, with a slight smile, "Just remember, I'm trusting you with my words. Use them carefully. If this conversation about creating truly inclusive workplaces has resonated with you, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe. These discussions matter for building better organizations where everyone can contribute their full talents." The article appeared 5 days later under the headline, "Beyond Diversity Theatre, a conversation with Marcus Richardson on authentic inclusion." It was thoughtful and substantive, presenting not just what had happened at Horizon, but the broader context of bias in the tech industry and pathways toward meaningful change. Within hours of publication, it had been shared thousands of times across social media and professional networks. CEOs and human resource leaders were citing it in conversations about their own diversity efforts. Employees were using it to articulate experiences they had struggled to name. At Accessitech, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Emails flooded in from companies seeking guidance, from individuals sharing their own stories, from universities asking Marcus to speak to their students. Diana organized a team to manage these requests, prioritizing those that seemed most genuine in their commitment to substantive change. "This is becoming a movement," she observed during their Monday morning meeting, "not just about what happened at Horizon, but about challenging the underlying patterns throughout the industry." Marcus nodded, both encouraged and cautious. "Movements are powerful, but they can also be co-opted. We need to maintain focus on actual change, not just conversations about change." Amara called that afternoon with updates from Horizon. "The article is having quite an impact here," she reported. "Andrew has sent it to the entire leadership team with a note saying it should be required reading. And the employee message board is more active than ever. People are sharing specific experiences and proposing solutions." "And Vanessa? How is she navigating all this?" "Brilliantly," Amara replied without hesitation. "She's using the momentum to push through changes that might have taken years otherwise. Just this morning, she announced new protocols for hiring and promotion that include structured interviews and diverse evaluation panels. These were concrete steps toward addressing systemic biases, not just symbolic gestures or vague commitments. It was encouraging, though Marcus remained aware of how quickly progress could stall or reverse without sustained attention. "There's something else," Amara continued, a new note in her voice. "Melissa Barrett has reached out asking to speak with you privately." This was unexpected. After her media appearances positioning herself as a victim, Melissa had gone quiet in recent days. "Did she indicate why?" "Not specifically," Amara said, "but reading between the lines, I think the article affected her, made her see the situation differently." Marcus considered his options. Meeting with Melissa carried risks. It could reopen wounds, create new misunderstandings, or distract from the broader work underway. But it also offered an opportunity for the kind of direct engagement that sometimes created unexpected bridges. "I'll meet with her," he decided, "but not alone. Would you be willing to join us?" "Of course," Amara agreed. "I'll arrange it." The meeting was set for the following afternoon in a neutral location, a small conference room at a business center downtown. Marcus arrived early, reviewing notes from the cultural assessment progress and centering himself for what might be a challenging conversation. Melissa arrived precisely on time, escorted by Amara. She looked different from her media appearances, less polished, more authentically nervous. She wore a simple blouse and slacks, her hair pulled back simply, her expression a mixture of apprehension and determination. "Mr. Richardson," she began as they sat across from each other, Amara at the side of the table between them. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "You're welcome, Ms. Barrett," he replied, keeping his tone neutral but not cold. "What did you want to discuss?" She took a visible breath. "I wanted to apologize, not just for what happened that day in the lobby, but for how I responded afterward." Her hands fidgeted slightly with the edge of a notebook she had brought. "I was scared and defensive. I made it about me when it wasn't." Marcus nodded slightly, acknowledging her words without immediately absolving her. "What changed your perspective?" "The article. Partly," she admitted. "Seeing the bigger picture of what these small moments actually mean for people. But also," she glanced at Amara, then back to Marcus. "My daughter. She's 17. She read all the coverage, watched my interviews, and she called me out, told me I was missing the point entirely. This was unexpected, a window into the private reckonings that sometimes happened beyond the public narrative." She said something that really hit me, Melissa continued. She asked how I would feel if someone assumed she couldn't do something because she's a woman. If they just looked at her and decided what she was capable of before she even opened her mouth. Her voice wavered slightly. And I realized I've been teaching her the wrong lessons, showing her it's okay to make assumptions about people and then get defensive when called on it. The vulnerability in her admission was palpable. Marcus felt a shift in his own perspective, seeing not just the receptionist who had directed him to the service entrance, but a mother wrestling with the implications of her actions and the example she was setting. "Thank you for sharing that," he said after a moment. "It takes courage to reconsider established positions." Melissa looked up, recognition flickering in her eyes at the same words he had offered to Ryan Nichols. "I'd like to make it right somehow, not just with words." "What did you have in mind?" Amara asked, speaking for the first time since introductions. "I don't know exactly," Melissa admitted, "but I want to be part of the solution, not just someone who created a problem and then made it worse." Marcus considered her request. There were legitimate questions about whether someone who had so quickly weaponized her own discomfort should be centered in conversations about change. And yet, transformation had to include everyone, not just those who already understood the issues. "The cultural assessment includes focus groups and listening sessions," he said finally. "Your perspective as someone who has moved from defensiveness to reflection might be valuable in those conversations, if you're willing to engage honestly and listen as much as you speak." Melissa nodded, relief visible in her posture. "I would like that. It's the least I can do." "It's not about what you owe," Marcus clarified. "It's about what you can contribute to creating something better." After the meeting concluded and Melissa had left, Amara turned to Marcus with a questioning look. "Do you think that was genuine?" "I think it was complicated," he replied honestly. "Part genuine reflection, part desire for redemption, part practical concern about her professional reputation. But motivation is often mixed. What matters is whether the actions that follow create positive change." Amara nodded slowly. "You know, when all this started, I expected you to be angry, to demand consequences. I wouldn't have blamed you at all." "I was angry," Marcus acknowledged. "I still am in some ways, but anger is only useful if it fuels constructive action. Otherwise, it just becomes another burden to carry." Walking back to his car after the meeting, Marcus felt the weight of the past 2 weeks. The emotional labor, the public scrutiny, the constant calculation of how to respond in ways that would create openings rather than defensiveness. It had been exhausting but also clarifying. Each conversation, each decision point had reinforced what mattered most. Not vindication or punishment, but transformation. Not just for one company, but for the structures and assumptions that shaped opportunities across entire industries. His phone buzzed with a text from Zora. "Just had my clinical evaluation. Professor specifically mentioned my exceptional diagnostic reasoning." "The same one who ignored me all last semester. Something's shifting, Dad." The message brought a smile to his face and a renewed sense of purpose. This was why it mattered. These incremental changes that might someday accumulate into a world where his daughter's brilliance would be recognized without qualification or surprise. 2 weeks after that first moment in the Horizon lobby, what had begun as a personal slight had evolved into something much larger, a catalyst for conversations that needed to happen, for changes that were long overdue. The work wasn't finished. In many ways, it had only just begun. But the openings had been created, the possibilities expanded. The receptionist glanced up from her computer, her smile warm and professional as she greeted the visitor. "Good morning. Welcome to Horizon Technologies. How may I help you today? Have you been moved by this exploration of how one moment can spark meaningful change? If so, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that examine the complexities of creating more inclusive environments where everyone's talents can flourish." The afternoon sun filled the Accessitech conference room as Marcus stood before a gathering of his expanded leadership team. In the 2 weeks since the publication of Paul's article, the company had experienced unprecedented growth, not just in business opportunities, but in influence and purpose. The newly formed Cultural Assessment Division sat alongside representatives from every department, ready to discuss how they would manage the growing demand for their expertise without compromising their core technology business. "Before we begin," Marcus said, looking around the table at the diverse group of leaders he had assembled over the years, I want to thank each of you for your flexibility and commitment during this unexpected evolution. None of this was in our strategic plan 3 weeks ago. Appreciative smiles and nods acknowledged the understatement. The Horizon incident had created a seismic shift in their trajectory, opening doors that previously seemed firmly closed. What started as a personal moment has become something much larger, he continued, an opportunity to address patterns that have limited potential and progress throughout our industry for too long. Diana, seated to his right, added, "The response has been overwhelming. We've had to create criteria for prioritizing which partnerships to pursue first. Everyone suddenly wants what we've been advocating for years, which is why we need to proceed thoughtfully," Marcus emphasized. "This work requires integrity and substance. We won't be offering quick fixes or superficial solutions." The meeting proceeded with detailed discussions about capacity, methodology, and values alignment. The new division would work only with organizations demonstrating genuine commitment to change, not those seeking merely to polish their public image. They would share approaches that had proven effective at AccessiTech, while acknowledging that each organizational context required unique considerations. As the meeting concluded, Marcus remained behind as others filed out, taking a moment to absorb what was unfolding. From his window, he could see Atlanta's skyline, the same view that had framed his reflection in Horizon's lobby glass that first morning. So much had changed since then, yet the fundamental challenges remained. Creating truly inclusive environments was never a single task to complete, but an ongoing commitment to examination and evolution. His phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa Washington. "Thought you'd want to know. Cultural assessment interim findings presented to full leadership today. Andrew actually teared up hearing some of the employee stories. Real change happening here. Thank you for starting this." Marcus smiled slightly at the update. The work at Horizon was progressing, gaining momentum that would hopefully sustain beyond the initial catalyst. Vanessa was proving to be exactly the leader the company needed in this moment, strategic but empathetic, determined but collaborative. Diana returned, closing the door behind her. "A moment before your next meeting," he nodded, gesturing to the chair across from him. "The Washington Post wants to do a feature on you, your background, your approach to leadership, and what's happening now with the cultural assessments." She watched his expression carefully. It would mean a much higher profile, more scrutiny, but also more influence. Marcus considered the opportunity. Until now, he had been selective about media engagement, preferring to let AccessiTech's work speak for itself. But perhaps this moment called for more direct advocacy, for articulating a vision that might inspire broader change. "I'll do it," he decided, "but I want to focus on the collaborative nature of this work. It's not about me individually." Diana nodded, making a note. "I thought you might say that. I'll set it up." She paused, studying him with the insight that came from 2 decades of friendship. "You know, Theodore and Gloria would be incredibly proud of what's happening here." The mention of his parents brought a warmth to his chest. They had both passed within a year of each other, shortly after AccessiTech secured its first major funding round. They had seen the beginning of what he was building, but not its full evolution. "I think they would," he agreed quietly. "Though Dad would probably tell me not to let it go to my head." Diana laughed. "He absolutely would," right before telling everyone he met about his son, the CEO. After she left, Marcus turned again to the window, to the city stretching before him. He thought of his father delivering mail through changing neighborhoods, of his mother teaching literature that helped students see themselves and others more completely. Different approaches to creating change, but similar in their fundamental belief that progress was possible through persistent, principled effort. He thought of Zora, navigating medical school with the same determination, the same awareness of being both exceptional and exceptionally scrutinized, and of Vivian, who would have approached this moment with fierce advocacy tempered by strategic wisdom. The past 3 weeks had been challenging, exhausting, and unexpectedly transformative. What had begun as a familiar slight, one of countless similar experiences throughout his career, had somehow catalyzed conversations and changes that might otherwise have taken years to emerge. Not because the incident itself was unusual, but because he had chosen to address it differently, not with righteous anger or quiet accommodation, but with an invitation to examine the underlying patterns and create something better. And because enough people at Horizon, from Andrew Patterson to Dr. Chen to Vanessa Washington, had been willing to accept that invitation, to engage with uncomfortable truths rather than defensive denial. Perhaps this was what his father had meant about changing the ladder itself, not just climbing higher individually, but creating structures that made the ascent more accessible for everyone, with the talent and determination to make the climb. The afternoon light shifted, casting his reflection in the window glass. Marcus Richardson, at 52, with the wisdom of experience and the energy for continued transformation, still learning, still growing, still working to build environments where everyone could contribute their full measure of talent without the burden of continually proving they belonged. The story wasn't finished, would never be finished as long as ingrained assumptions continued to shape opportunities. But perhaps it had entered a new chapter, one with expanded possibilities for progress. And in that expansion lay the most meaningful response to what had happened in Horizon's lobby 3 weeks ago. Not punishment or vindication, but transformation. If you've made it to the end of this journey with us, please take a moment to click the like button and subscribe for more stories that explore the complexities of leadership, inclusion, and meaningful change. And if you found value in Marcus's approach to creating transformation from challenging moments, click on the video appearing on your screen now for an even more powerful exploration of how courage and vision can reshape our workplaces and world.